Look, I do believe that we have Prime Minister Kevin Rudd on the line right now. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, Ben Fordham here at 2GB. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ben. Thanks for having me on your program.
Thank you for talking to us. During this election campaign, Prime Minister, you reminded us that Julia Gillard was heading towards a very, very catastrophic defeat. They were your words. Are you sure you're not doing the same thing?
You know something, Ben? That's for all your listeners to decide which way they vote on Saturday. And the reason for coming on your program is to explain what our policies mean for them and to put a spotlight on what Mr Abbott's policies of cuts mean for them as well.
All right, if I can put the spotlight on some of your comments during the election campaign, and we'll try and keep the answers and the questions short and sharp so we can get through a lot. But during the election campaign, you've been telling us over and over that when we finally see these costings, there are going to be, cuts to education, cuts to health? Prime Minister, there's no cuts to education. Prime Minister, there's no cuts to health.
Well, you know something, Ben? I'll just draw a few things to your attention. This morning, Mr Abbott said two completely contradictory things. The first thing he said was, no.
But hang on, Prime Minister, can we focus, because we've got limited time, can we focus on the questions I'm asking? Can we focus on the question? Forget about Mr Abbott. You've been saying that there were going to be cuts to education and health. There aren't any. You've been caught with your pants down.
Ben, if you allow me to answer your question, I will. And on the question of cuts to education, given what you've just said, why was it that Mr Abbott, when asked this question this morning, will you quarantine, rule out what your Commission of Audit will look at cutting in the future? He said, I will not rule out anything.
No, because he's about to take over the role of Prime Minister, and obviously we've got a lot of money that we've got to pay back, as you well know, so he's not committing to anything. But the bottom line is there are no cuts to education, and there are no cuts...
and cuts to health, then that actually is not the case. You've just said it yourself. He's giving himself a mandate to do whatever he wants. So I don't think your proposition that you put to me in your question is right.
Oh, but no, well, the proposition is exactly right. There are no cuts in the costings to health. There are no cuts in the costings to education.
Well, tell me this, Ben, even if you accept that, which I don't because of what I've just said before, because he refused to quarantine them in a statement this morning and said that everything was on the table. Just go to one point of detail. There's a thing called the Better Schools Plan. We've committed to $10 billion worth of additional investment into the schools of all of Western Sydney and all the rest of New South Wales where you broadcast to. And what he has done is committed to a little over $2 billion of that, in effect cutting $8 billion thereabouts out of it. If you don't think that's a cut to education, Ben, then frankly, we're talking about different understandings of basic mathematics.
Since you changed John Howard's border protection policies, we've had more than 50,000 people arrive by boat. In fact, it's up to 51,294 at my count. More than 1,000 people are estimated to have died. Yes or no, if you had your time again, would you have scrapped the Pacific solution?
Well, I think the first thing you need to answer about or talk about there, before I go straight to your question...
You could always go straight to it, Prime Minister.
Of all those who were sent into the Pacific Islands, 70% were then sent on to either Australia or
Prime Minister, why don't we just go... We've got an election on Saturday. I've got limited time with you. Let's go straight to the question. Yes or no, if you had your time again, would you have changed...
...for a success is not backed up by
Prime Minister, come on, give me a go here. I'm asking direct questions and I want a direct answer. If you had your time again, would you have scrapped the Pacific solution, yes or no?
I hear you. Sorry.
Prime Minister? Mr. Rudd? Mr. Rudd, can you not hear me? Prime Minister? Well, I think we've lost the Prime Minister. Can we see whether we can get Mr. Rudd back up? Or see whether he calls back in? I mean, honestly. The election's on Saturday. And I've got a limited time talking to the Prime Minister. And I just want a straight answer. I can just see outside the studio at the moment that there are phones ringing. I'm just waiting for a thumbs up or a thumbs down to see whether he is back on. So stay with us. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd is our guest on the show this afternoon, and we do have him back up on the line. We obviously lost the line there temporarily. Prime Minister, sorry, I'll just finish that question if I could. If you had your time again, would you have scrapped the Pacific solution, yes or no?
Well, the Pacific solution didn't work in the end. What we should have done back in 2000...
Prime Minister, you're not answering the question.
I just was answering it in my way rather than perhaps...
But your way is not to answer it.
No, my way is to answer a question by saying the Pacific solution didn't work because 70% of the people ended up back in either Australia or New Zealand anyway. The second point is this. In 2010 and 2009, 2010, there were new civil wars emerging around the region.
Prime Minister, I know this, but I'm asking you about when you changed the policy. You've acknowledged you're this new man this time around and you've learnt from past errors. How can you learn from a mistake if you refuse to even acknowledge the mistake? Every man and his dog knows it was a mistake to dump the Pacific solution, and I'm asking you about that, but you're talking about Nauru and you're talking about changing conditions in the year after that, 2009 or 2010. Would you have changed the Pacific solution if you had your time again?
And what I'm saying to you, Ben, in direct answer to that, the Pacific solution ultimately didn't work because 70% of people ended up back in Australia
Prime Minister,
and in New Zealand after having spent a year or so in Nauru anyway. That's a fact.
The boat stopped, Prime Minister, as you know.
Today, new policy which sends a very clear-cut message to people smugglers that if you come by boat to Australia and you bring someone here, that person will not be able to be settled here. And that's what we're implementing now. In the course of the last month, you've begun to see the effectiveness of the policy. And we believe we've got to continue with that policy into the future. And we think it's probably about getting the balance right. It's a tough challenge for all governments around the world.
The parents of one of the young men killed in the botched insulation scheme. Hello, Prime Minister? I think we've lost Kevin Rudd again. So that's the end of that, I'm guessing, because we were told we had between 5:15 and 5:25, and it's now right on 25 past. And he apparently has another interview crammed in from 25 past onwards. So unless the phone rings again, no, I think we might have him back on there again. Does he want to quickly finish the interview so we can wrap it up, or is our time up? So Prime Minister Kevin Rudd has been talking to us. He is still there. He's back on the line. So it must be a dodgy phone line or something we're dealing with. We're just waiting to see whether he wants to come back on. Whether he's able to come back on. No, we've got him there again. Prime Minister, I obviously got a bad line, but just quickly, if I can ask you, the parents of one of the young men killed in the botched insulation scheme, they were critical of the way that you treated them following the death of their son, Kevin and Christine Fuller. You would have seen them on the 7:30 report, and they revealed recently that you'd never apologised to them in person over the death of their 25-year-old son, Matthew Fuller. Have you made contact with them since they revealed that on the 7:30 report?
Look, in terms of my personal contact with the Fullers, who have gone through an extraordinary personal difficult time because of the death of their son, I don't propose on radio to go into detail about conversations, and that's been actually mutually agreed between myself and them. So I think that's being respectful towards them, as I said at the time, and I've said since then. As the Prime Minister today, I've accepted full responsibility for any government program like this one which was not implemented properly. And that's my position. You can try and walk away from responsibility for government programs that didn't work, or ones that reached out to a million different homes across the country. But I've been
why won't you release the 10
and accepted responsibility?
Why won't you release the 10 warning letters you received telling you that there were dangers with the program?
The Australian Audit Office, Ben, has had access to every document, cabinet and non-cabinet, which is available on these matters. And as a result, you have the Audit Office produce its own report. They've had full access to all documentation. There have been about 7 or 8 different inquiries into this as well.
It's interesting, Prime Minister.
I'm going to jump out of the car now because I'm about to arrive at another function.
Let me guess, you got a zip?
Well, no, I just got to be at another function. I'm sorry our phone keeps dropping in and out, but thank you very much for having me on your program.
Thank you, Mr. Rudd.
All the best.
Okay, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. So that was a bit all over the shop. My apologies for that. And if I had my wishes, we would have had a proper conversation with Kevin Rudd over the last however many weeks we've had in this election campaign. But they've dragged it on, and we've been on hold and on standby for an interview, and then we kind of get stuffed around like that, and it was on the run. But you just can't get a straight answer out of him. That's the reason Kevin Rudd is going to lose this election and lose it comprehensively on Saturday. One of the reasons is because when he is under the pump, that's the time where you've really got to show your mettle and show who you are and take things on the chin and use some body armour if need be to protect yourself from the arrows that are flying your way. But when you ask Kevin Rudd a simple question, he will not give you a straight answer. And I know that politicians from all persuasions go out of their way not to answer questions, but that is ridiculous. There's a set question there about whether or not, if he had his time again, would he have scrapped the Pacific solution? And you know the answer, and I know the answer. Everyone knows the answer. The answer is no. He would not have scrapped the Pacific solution, but he can't bring himself to say it. And he even then says, when talking about the insulation scheme, well, as Prime Minister of the day, I've taken full responsibility, as I should. Yeah, well, on that one, and even then it's debatable whether you have been completely open on it because you don't want to release those letters, but you won't take responsibility for the other decision, which has left us in a scenario where more than 1,000 people have died trying to get to Australia and 51,000 have made it. He would not have scrapped the Pacific solution, but he can't bring himself to say it. And he even then says, when talking about the insulation scheme, well, as Prime Minister of the day, I've taken full responsibility, as I should. Yeah, well, on that one, and even then it's debatable whether you have been completely open on it because you don't want to release those letters, but you won't take responsibility for the other decision, which has left us in a scenario where more than 1,000 people have died trying to get to Australia and 51,000 have made it. Byron is online. Hello, Byron.
Hey, Ben, how are you?
I'm well, Byron.
Look, I was just listening to the Prime Minister's little get out of jail card just then, and I just want to ask you the question in the list is, do you think he was deliberately hanging up to find an answer for you, which he couldn't even answer?
I don't think so, because when he came back on the line, he hadn't found one.
Exactly, but obviously his advisors are seeing the polls and knowing that, well, on Sunday morning they won't have a job, so let's not bother.
Good on you, Byron. Thank you very much. Look, I don't think that was happening. I think Kevin Rudd's phone was cracking up and was breaking up, and that's why the phone line cut out. I don't think he'd be hanging up the phone, and he certainly called back and came back on here. But